It's YNK, so since I stole all of Thorin's gigs, at the very least, what you guys can do is subscribe to his YouTube channel, so go on and do it right now.
It has just been announced that FaZe Clan will use AdreN as a stand-in for, first of all, the iBuyPower's Master, but going through that, including any other events there might be, up into the Major itself, i.e. Katowice. Technically, he is just a stand-in. No one knows yet. The only two events we know he will play at is that Major and the iBuyPower Masters, which is January 19th to 20th. He's replacing Karrigan, who was obviously benched at the very end of last year and will actually be playing as a stand-in for the American team Envious in the Americas Minor. They have also signed a new coach. They have signed Yanko, formerly of MIBR and an analyst, as the coach for FaZe Clan. Robban, the previous coach, stood down. I mean, it was a few days ago, I think. So let's go through this piece by piece. In terms of AdreN, we don't have to question whether or not it was a good idea for his team to let him go, because the team he was playing for, Gambit, where obviously he won a major, had released him on December 1st. A very bizarre scenario as to why they just released him. You notice they put AdreN and they put Hobbit on the transfer market months ago, way back at ESL New York. Nobody seemed to bite at that point in time. So for whatever reasons, it seems as though the Gambit organization actually just let AdreN go, didn't even try to sell him. There's something very weird going on at Gambit, because they implied, or at least it seemed from their moves, like they were going to shut the CSGO division down entirely, maybe even shut the organization down. But they haven't. They haven't disbanded the team, even though Hobbit and AdreN, the two big key pieces, the most valuable pieces in the team, arguably the two star names, have now left. Hobbit went to Hellraisers. AdreN now goes to FaZe. The team isn't making any signs of abandoning their squad. Initially, they signed Dimasic. Now they signed Bondik to replace him in the lineup. So they're still recruiting players. And yet, obviously, AdreN, I mean, he was the heart and soul of Gambit. The whole time he was there, quite frankly, he was the best player overall. He was the most essential in terms of defining the style and the strengths of Gambit, and as an old school legendary CIS figure with still the ability to compete, he in many ways embodied what Gambit was trying to be when they picked up those Hellraisers players in the first place and made this org that eventually became a very different type of org that was able to win a CSGO major after becoming a very competent team in 2017. So this is a guy who was the star player of that team by the end. But when he first joined the team and when he'd had his Hellraisers days, yeah, he was just a good player. He wasn't even the star player of the Virtus Pro lineups in the early days, the ones that first were able to dethrone NIP and end the 87-0. He was one of the lesser players in the team, actually, more of kind of a supportive figure and someone kind of doing the dirty work in that team. In this Gambit, he became the star player. He became one of the best players in the entire world. He became the MVP of a major. He reinvented himself as a player. So now he comes to join, at least as a stand-in, FaZe Clan. Okay, for AdreN himself, I think this is a great move. It's almost the best move he could do at this point in his career, and in terms of what's possible, like what teams might have picked him up. You could argue that joining Na'Vi would have been better because of the whole cultural shared experience, the same language, so you could communicate better. Also, if you win another major and you win it for another CIS team, because there's only one CIS team being Gambit has won a major, and Na'Vi has never won a major, it would mean so much more to that region, to that team, to the CIS people in general. You could argue that's a better move, but then again, we don't actually know if that would actually make Na'Vi the number one team, if that would make Na'Vi win a major. You could argue there's more talent in FaZe Clan, even though they're lacking in-game leader and some structure, they've got so many fabulous pieces, so many Hall of Fame names. This makes just another Hall of Fame name join the team. In fact, if AdreN was at a peak skill, this would be the first time ever you could actually say about FaZe Clan what a lot of lazy analysts and players said throughout the years anyway, which is, wow, it's a team of 5-star players. And I always used to want to go, hold up a minute, when the fuck was Karrigan ever a star player in CSGO, homie? But anyway, people pushed that narrative. No, it actually would be true if AdreN was at top level. This would be 5 world-class potential top 10 players in the world all in one lineup. So great move for him in terms of getting a lot of talent to work with. Except going back to that original lineup of Virtus Pro, he's never played with talent close to this level. At that point in time, they had a number of very skilled players, not quite FaZe Clan level relative to their era, but they had some of the best players in the world. It was one of the most skilled teams in the world, and he was one of the lesser members of the team, and therefore he was on an incredibly skilled team with a lot of help. All his later years, at the end of Hellraisers, with Gambit, and especially with the more recent Gambit, he was one of the better players, at times in amazing form in the world, and generally his teammates weren't as good, his team wasn't as good, and they were never going to be able to get the talent to be as good, because they weren't a massive org. Gambit isn't an org with a lot of money. You don't see them making massive, high-profile signings of big, in-demand free agents or buying players. It just doesn't really happen. They're a team that you move on from, or you stay in if you're a washed-up CIS veteran, or you just like some of the players in that team, quite frankly. So that looked like it was going to be the end of his career. Now he's getting this one last chance, seemingly, to do something amazing and maybe the biggest thing ever at the end of his career. So great move for AdreN. From the FaZe side of things, okay, it was the right move to replace Karrigan, sort of, as in, I do think he had lost the ear of his players and they didn't believe in him, which is very key, because when people don't believe in you and they don't believe that you're doing the right thing, they are not going to buy into what you're telling them to do and your overall philosophy of the game, which means they will either not do it as well as they could, their heart won't be in it, they won't be fully committed, or they might even half-ass it, which can be even worse at times because people say, well, I did what you said, but it didn't work. And that is just inevitably, because they don't respect you as much anymore, you are inevitably going to go out of the door, whether you are an in-game leader, whether you're a star player, whether you're a coach, when people do not believe in you anymore. You saw that when they kicked Simple out of Flipside, even though he was far and away the best player in the team, if you go back to 2015, early 2016. But they booted him out of the team because they didn't believe in him as a player, and they didn't like the way he worked in their team, and they didn't want to have him around anymore. So from that context, personally, as soon as FaZe Clan lost that V4 Future Festival in the semi-finals to Virtus Pro, who just added Mihu, as far as I was concerned, I did a tweet at the time, that was the end of that lineup of FaZe Clan. Something needed to change about that 5-man lineup. It had run its course. It had had plenty of chances to succeed at all different levels. They'd had a lot of success, but they had clearly capped out. They'd had their best days were behind them. They were, if anything, starting to degrade. Players were coming off individual form. The team was getting figured out or countered or studied or neutralized to some degree. And Karrigan himself wasn't as effective and the players weren't as effective. So it was time to make a change. So either you needed to acknowledge, right, something about our style has played out, or the chemistry of this 5-man unit isn't good enough, because one thing I always found confusing about FaZe is you had a number of players who in isolation are clutch or very clutch, or some of the most clutch in CS history, but as a team, they often weren't that clutch in high-pressure games, or even in clutch situations, bizarrely. So as a result, I always felt it was an example of where team identity and style can supersede the individual ingredients of the team. So quite frankly, something about those ingredients needed to be changed, whether it was that they didn't listen to Karrigan, whether they didn't buy into the system, whether individual form was off because the chemistry wasn't right, they didn't have the right pieces to facilitate each other, or just other teams rising up and having had your time in the sun, whatever it was, I think one way or another you needed to rebuild heavily. And that meant either keep Karrigan, which personally is what I would have liked, but I know because of the politics of which players lost faith in it, it couldn't have happened. But if you could have kept Karrigan, then you needed to cut the players that didn't believe in him. Then you needed to make a minimum of one cut. I would suggest maybe even 2 or more. And the fact that Nico is one of the players who didn't believe in him meant you're cutting your best player, your franchise player, and the player that, regardless of what the lineup of FaZe Clan is, you hope is still in FaZe Clan in 5 years and is still one of the best players in the world, and you've made use of the prime of a truly legendary CSGO player. On the other hand, Karrigan, he's been around CS a long time. He's had a very long career. He's even been in-game leader for quite a long time now. Many people will see him as someone where you're only going to get a year or 2 more of him. Who knows how much longer he'll play in the game before he transitions to be a coach, or he goes outside of the game, or he becomes an analyst, whatever it might be. You just don't see the same upside to Karrigan. So when it's Nico is the player in question, it's different. If it was Olofmeister and it's Rain, I personally would say cut Olofmeister and Rain, keep Karrigan, let's get some other pieces in. Let's get some pieces from Optic or North or one of these other teams, Scream or someone. I personally wouldn't say Scream, but I know fans will, so I'll put those names out there. AdreN, Hobbit. These are the names you could recruit and reformulate FaZe entirely. So bearing in mind they didn't want to do that, they went the other route, which is that they cut Karrigan and they decided everyone else in the team's good, everyone else can come fulfill their role, everyone can be part of a potential #1 team. Certainly a gamble in its own right, but I can see why they might think so, especially because star players tend to share a similar view to other star players, and I don't think they blamed each other. So what's interesting to me, keeping all the rest of the good players and cutting the least skilled player, Karrigan, and now trying to go a different route, and seemingly, if Nico's going to remain in-game leader, not bringing in a dedicated, less skilled in-game leader. What's funny is, I actually can draw a contrast now between this era of FaZe Clan with all good good players, but no clear in-game leader or one with a legendary past. It actually reminds me of Robban, the former FaZe Clan coach, his SK Gaming lineups. Because in 1.6, what happened was, SK Gaming used to be the best team in the world in the first half of the 2000s, when they had Heaton and Potty, and then Element, and then later on, they had Spawn, and then they brought in people like Hyper towards the end, and they had Vilden, and he came back later. What happened was, then the team went and formed NIP, made the super team. It didn't work, and a bunch of the players, except Heaton and Potty, came back to SK, and they made this SK that went back to back in 2005 with Spawn and Vilden, and Hyper wasn't there, he'd retired, and Arl and Fisker and these guys. And what happened was, that team then morphed over the years because it had its lull period 1 or 2 years later. How it got reformulated is, in the meantime, NIP recruited different players. Vale, who's a star individual player, Zet, and all these players, and etc. And what happened was, when the NIP team collapsed, they rebuilt SK using some of the stars. So Vale came over to play for SK, and Robban came over to SK, and Spawn came over to SK again. And then over time, they added new talents. And what they did is the same recruitment strategy that the top team in Swedish Counter-Strike, so NIP, and then SK, and then NIP, and then SK, had used for many years, which was, you just remove the least skilled or worst performing player, you replace him with a very skilled player, arguably someone who's one of the best or one of your rivals who's currently upsetting you, and therefore he's impressing you, he's from your country, from Sweden, and you just stack star players, and you trust that somehow really good players are going to find a way to make these roles work. Someone's going to be a decent enough in-game leader, and then the in-game leader is going to be able to use this player as an entry-ish fragger, and this guy's sort of a lurk. And we don't have hard roles, but we have set ways that we're all going to play, and we've got so much skill that we're going to win the games anyway. And SK Gaming lineups were very good. They were top 5 teams in the world at times. In 2011, they were the number 1 team in the world when they had Get Right and Forest. But during the era of Vale and Robban, players who themselves had been star players and who'd been in teams like this, which is why they had this philosophy, didn't focus on getting a true in-game leader. They themselves took the role over. Vale did it till the end of 2010, and then you had Robban take over as the full-time in-game leader. They had former stars and skilled players be in-game leaders, and then because those guys themselves thought they could role swap, they tended not to try and pick up support players or other kinds of set roles but less skilled players but who play a specific star. Instead, they just recruited talent over and over again, and by the end of the game they were just stacking star aimer on star aimer with in-game leaders being these former players, and therefore they didn't have a true modern Counter-Strike structure. They played very much off like chemistry, basic concepts that star players understand, and fragging ability. So they were very good, but they were rarely ever the number 1 teams in the world. Meanwhile, the Fnatic squad, which were their core rivals, didn't tend to recruit this way. They had 1 year that was very successful when they did. Other than that, they tried generally to bring in these different pieces that worked socially or could play a supportive role or played an hard entry role, and they generally, over history, had slightly more success than SK. So it's interesting to me that we're going to an all-star lineup of FaZe now when actually they're leaving Robban behind, because he's actually a guy who that was his in-game leadership style from 2011 to 2012, culminating in one of the most ridiculous superstar teams ever made, which was the SK Gaming team with Forest and Get Right, who got in Trace, the best Danish player, for a couple of tournaments towards the end of 1.6, and this lineup did not work. They never won a massive tournament. They were never the number 1 team. They actually weren't even that close to being number 1, believe it or not. They kind of wasted all the talent in the team. So I find it interesting that they've become reminiscent of that, and now they've got all these pieces, but how will the pieces fit together? So in terms of recruiting AdreN, I think it's a great gamble to take, because it is a gamble. Now, the reason why it's a great gamble to take is because unless you were going to be able to straight up sign Simple or Twists or NAF or Cold Zera or Sunny or Oscar, players of this caliber, then what's the point in signing star talent? At this point in time, I mean, we saw what happened when MIBR went through all the names on their list and got past the Nikos and Simples and these good shocks, these names, and went all the way down the list that the name was Stewie2K. Now, that's a good signing, but it's not a superstar signing. So if you sign him, you're not going to make him one of the best players in the focal point of your team. He's probably going to get pushed to a side role. If he gets pushed to a side role and he hasn't played those roles and he's not amazing at them, it's probably not going to be as good a team. And if you're recruiting him in the first place because he needed some firepower, how does that address the problem of your star players, right? Likewise, Mouse Sports with Snacks, same exact problem. Would you even want those types of players at this point in time unless you are willing to replace your stars? Now listen, I could make an argument, in fact I would, you heard me make it earlier with Karrigan, that maybe some of the stars even of FaZe should actually be removed. Like, for example, I wouldn't be that mad if someone told me we can get Simple, but we need to replace someone. I would say, cool. Take out Guardian. Make Simple the Orpra of Na'Vi. Make him the guy you base the game around. Him and Nico's who I'm going to base the game around. Don't take out Olaf and Rain. They actually do a job. I don't know that Simple could do Rain or Olaf's job. Why would I want them to? So if I brought in Simple, now you're going to make Guardian do some of their jobs? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Or Guardian's just going to be just an Orpra, but not the one with all the resources. You see, it doesn't make as much sense to me. And I think you could make a strong argument. One of the reasons I think that Nico was amazing in 2018 is I thought there was a lot of times in 2018 that FaZe Clan was very different from 2017 FaZe Clan, where almost everyone was good in the team and they were very dominant fragging wise. I thought actually they weren't even the super team in 2018. Oftentimes it was just Nico hard carrying like a Simple, like a himself back in Mouse. And then all of a sudden it's players like Guardian and fucking Olaf and Rain who were playing the roles of Dennis and Spiddy and Chris J and those players that were bombs and mouse spots, but at a higher level, obviously at the semi-final, at the final, at the championship level. Those ended up being at times liabilities or players who didn't produce fragging wise. And so it was Nico left solo card carrying. So you could argue if you're going to recruit those star players, do it, but replace like for like. Instead, what they're recruiting now, I'm really glad they recruited it, is in theory a complementary piece. AdreN isn't coming in with the form or the clout right now to say, make the game around me. He hasn't played well enough in 2018. So instead, he is being brought in, I hope, to fill a role, to be intelligent, to be a veteran, to be a glue guy, to be a fix-it-all, to be someone who can anchor sites, who can play specific sets that will be a catalyst to facilitate other people's play, to bring Guardian's game back, to bring Olaf's game to a higher level, to get Rain back on track, to help Nico be the best he can be. Because even though it was a poor year for AdreN as a star player, his skill set is still very valuable. And it's beyond just frags and stats. This is a guy who is a very clutch player. Now, I know that doesn't always work in FaZe, because as I said, they've got some amazing clutch players. As a team, don't always live up to that as a collective identity. But he's been incredible when he was in Gambit. He's got a high CS IQ, as in his in-game understanding. Maybe he couldn't articulate or he isn't as eloquent enough to explain to you what he's doing, but his understanding of what he's doing in the game and his read of the game, I actually think is one of the best in all of CSGO. When he was at his prime as an MVP, top 5 player in the world type guy in the summer of 2017, yes, he had good skills and he could kill people well and frag well and he was clutch and all the rest of it and had experience. But for me, it's how he used his mind that made him, at the time, I actually think legitimately looked like someone who had mastered Counter-Strike. He was on the level with the Zipnixes and the Cold Zeros where they just look like they understand in the majority of situations, not only the best move to make, but will consistently pick a better move or make a better decision or read than even the other best players in the world. So I've always thought he had a very strong understanding of mid-round play, which is how he was able to play his different roles in Virtus Pro, in Hellraisers, in Gambit. I think you saw that individually, but also you saw it when he was the in-game leader of Gambit post-Krakow. When Zeus left, they had that great run to top 4 at DreamHack Masters Malmo right afterwards, including beating the FaZe Clan with Olaf Meister and Guardian in that best of 3 in the group stage of that tournament, where that team went out in the group stage. And you saw it was all based on mid-round calls from AdreN, who was the in-game leader. He took his individual game, he applied some of those strengths to the team game, which, by the way, I would argue is what Nico does when he's in Mouse Spots, when he's in FaZe Clan as the in-game leader. I think it's a logical thing to do if you're a star player who takes over. So I could see him working very well with these other FaZe players. First of all, they have his respect, even though he's more of a vet and legend than most of them. And at the same time, because his level wasn't that good, I think he's going to be willing to create space, to facilitate people, to be someone who does hard roles in the team in order to win and be a champion. He hasn't had that much of a chance to be a champion in CSGO, despite winning the major. Having won a major means he's got the experience and the wherewithal that some of the FaZe players in majors haven't yet been able to show, and he's accomplished something they haven't accomplished, and yet they obviously want to accomplish in the future. That's a positive as well. He's been there, he's done it right. I think that's all leaving aside AdreN being anything other than the player he was at the end in Gambit. If he ever gets anywhere close to the form he was in over the first half of 2017 and the latter half of 2016, hold on to your arsehole, because that would make FaZe, in terms of individual players, fucking unbelievable god tier. Maybe the best lineup skill-wise to ever be assembled in any team esport I'm aware of, particularly Counter-Strike, and that's any version of Counter-Strike. That's how crazy a level FaZe would be on. Now, admittedly, they might still have in-game leader issues. Maybe NiKo won't turn out to be a good enough in-game leader to have a world #1 team in the world or a major champion. But with as much ability, with as much versatility in terms of roles, the fact that everyone in the lineup now is played as a star player and not as a star player at certain points in time, it's a very interesting bunch of players, right? And obviously, the key thing we really need to wait for with this much talent is to see the chemistry. If the chemistry is there early on, it can be an incredibly dangerous team. You could argue the ultimate puncher's chance to win the major and become a potential #1 team, dethrone Astralis. If things don't work out chemistry-wise, they could also be a train wreck, collapse in on themselves, not do a whole lot, and just have NiKo frag, which is what happened at times towards the end of last year, which admittedly was still a very good team, was still a top 5 team in the world, clearly, although they had those few months before that where they dropped down. But they weren't going to be #1. That's the key thing. They weren't ever going to be a consistent #1, and they weren't, quite frankly, probably going to win the major. They had a puncher's chance, but they probably would have gotten stopped by a Team Liquid, by an Astralis, maybe by a Na'Vi. Now, in terms of Yanko, right, another tough one, because MIBR releasing him in isolation is the wrong move, because Yanko went to them, changed them as a team for the better. That is clear to me. I can't claim to know everything. I know some things from some of the players inside. I know some things from Yanko. I know some things just from looking with my eyes and comparing MIBR before he got there and MIBR after he got there. They went from being also runs who actually were looking in like they were going to be threatened to even stay in the top 10 of the world rankings, were not picking up series wins over ranked opponents, the worst position of their careers, not relevant to win any big trophies, to a team that by the end, they weren't a consistent contender, but they were contending for big titles. They were matching up great against Astralis, one of the toughest teams in the world to match up with, and they were getting some wins and some placings that suggested they could have been a solid, I'd say, 4th to 6th team in the world. That's where I thought they were going to stay at. I thought that's where they'd capped out. Now, I don't personally buy the idea that they'd figured that out themselves, and that Yanko just happened to be stood there and that they figured it all out and he wasn't any part of it. I think he was a big part of it. I think if you look at the team before they had him, before they got Tarek, they were a joke. Even after they got Tarek, it wasn't that big of an upgrade. They were a team, I can tell you from internally and externally observing them, they were shit out of ideas. They had no clue what to do. That's why you saw them swapping coldzera and Fallen as in-game leader. That's why you saw their map pool go to shit and them abandon Trainer Overpass, just stick to Inferno and Cash and be terrible on Mirage. You saw even people like coldzera's level went down. They didn't know how to use their players as well. They were a team that was shit out of ideas. That's why they made the panic move to sign a fucking famously toxic Ukrainian star player, Simple, who doesn't even know any of them on a personal level, really, doesn't have any cultural or historical overlap with them, but they were just desperate to get one of the best players in the world and turn their fortunes around. They were out of ideas as to how to win. So I think that Yanko is someone who, I think, quite frankly, he still had a lot more to implement, a lot more to give to the team. Although, yes, as we've seen from his interview with HLTV, it doesn't seem like they were very receptive anymore or open to doing any more. Seems like they themselves thought the lineup had run its course when they got the chance to get Stewie and Zeus back. So, quite frankly, I don't think as a team they were going any further. I still think Yanko was a good coach for them and should have been held on. I think their last lineup, not the one that they've just signed now with Taco and Zeus, obviously, I don't think, bearing in mind they were never going to give him a crack at the all-Brazilian lineup because he's not speaking Portuguese for obvious reasons. I think he did the best he could in that team, and he actually, for my money, showed himself to be a competent coach. Whether he's going to come on to be one of the best coaches, let's see in this next team. That might give us more of a sense as we check again, before and after, what he implements, what people say in interviews. Even though it was the wrong move in isolation, in the context of being able to get Zeus and him being in any sense available, it was the right move. You can't ignore the history of Zeus with those players. They were at their best. That's when they won majors. You can't change the circumstances that Yanko is from Serbia. He is speaking English himself as a second language. They're speaking English as a second language. They're from Brazil. They have no overlap, no shared common history. They come from a totally different school of thinking about the game. No cultural connections. There's too many things that go in favor of Zeus and against Yanko before we even get to the game. Then add that in the game, Zeus Zeus is one of the only coaches who categorically has a better track record than Yanko, has done amazing things with 2 different teams now, has accomplished incredible success, has gone deep in majors, has gone to the finals of massive international tournaments again and again and again and again. We're talking double digits times across the 2 teams now, has led many different lineups. He even left the lineup with JDM and Stanislaw to make it to big international finals. This guy's resume is fucking amazing, and if anyone can get him, unless you're Astralis with Zonic, you got to consider it at least, as long as it's not a team that only speaks Russian or something. So Zeus, unfortunately, is the perfect candidate to replace Yanko with, and I don't disagree necessarily with MIBR doing it. As I said in my video about that, I think that could be a great move for them, and that now Zeus has won their respect in a way he didn't have when he was there, and this could be the missing piece. Now, in terms of FaZe, okay, the Robban one, we don't have to debate, was it the right move to let Robban go? I already thought he should have maybe been on the chopping block anyway for how FaZe has been under the time he's been there. It doesn't seem like, aside from externally and small things, like he did that much. So I always felt like he should take some of the blame for some of the losses, just like Cuban should in Virtus Pro. They should be potentially fired if they can't deliver on expectations. But that's luckily not even a problem, because due to supposedly the whole family aspect of Robban and him thinking about where his career is going and Karrigan leaving, he decided to step down anyway. Now, I already thought, as I alluded to, he might not have brought what was needed, because on the one hand, okay, he's not a super tactical coach. He never was a super tactical in-game leader, actually. He read the game, he studied the game, and he made his reads off what happened in the game. For me, that is ideal for Karrigan as an in-game leader, because that means that Karrigan is running his teams in a manner that Robban can relate to, therefore Robban can give him space to run the team. But that's also because Karrigan wants to be the one who runs everything. He doesn't want always someone else inserting themselves or disagreeing with them or having to do a powwow with them. He only wants someone when he asks them to do that. Now, Nico, I think, if he's going to be an in-game leader, and a competent one, because he's going to be doing so much of the fragging himself, has got to have a tactical coach, for my money, to aid him, to help him, to guide him, to educate him in the role. So I think getting Yanko is a great move, because Yanko's history with Nico is he was Nico's in-game leader when they were in I Nation. He is someone who has been Nico's friend for many years, throughout all the times in Mouse Sports and all the times in FaZe and all the times in this FaZe, and hearing what's been going on with Karrigan and with his past players, with Gob B in Mouse Sports, and then when Nico was the in-game leader in Mouse Sports. So not only does Yanko have Nico's respect, he is his friend and has already won him over on that respect, something very difficult to do as a coach. You could argue that could have a negative effect, and he might kowtow to what Nico wants or be unduly biased to Nico. Okay, that could happen. I'd hope as a man he doesn't do that, but I could see a little bit of bias interjecting itself. But I think the positives outweigh the negatives, in as much as I alluded to earlier, this is Nico's team. Nico is the face of FaZe. He is the franchise player. He must not only be happy, but be helped if he is going to in any way be the in-game leader. I didn't address it before because they haven't said it, but I would be interested if they made AdreN the in-game leader, because I don't think, from talking to him, that he enjoyed it when he was in Gambit, so I don't know that he'd want to do it. Then again, very different to be the in-game leader of Dossier and more than it is to be the in-game leader of Nico and Guardian. I'd kind of enjoy playing with those pieces, and might be willing to give that role up in order to get on a better team, maybe win majors and be the in-game leader, right? Makes sense. So I also think, crucially, Yanko shares the philosophy Nico has for the game. Not only did he help Nico learn that philosophy, but if you ever hear the way Nico talks about the game, envisions the game, him and Yanko have a lot of overlap, a lot of alignment. I said in my video when Yanko joined MIBR, I actually thought FaZe was the better team for Yanko to join, with that force buy mentality, with exploiting individual matchups, with finding certain strong suits and playing them out, sometimes brute force style, sometimes based on just intelligent reads that the best players can make. That is Yanko's mind for the game. That is how FaZe Clan wants to play the game anyway. They just stopped being able to do it and stopped listening to Karrigan by the end. I think he understands Nico as an in-game leader. First of all, just go back and look on analysis desks how Yanko analysed Mouse Sports when Nico was the in-game leader. Didn't criticise him as in-game leader a lot, understood the burden that he was carrying, understood he was working with lesser players who sometimes couldn't deliver and couldn't do things under pressure in a match that they could in the scrim server. So he already understands some of the things that Nico has been through. I crucially think he can help make this FaZe Clan, as he did with MIBR, a more coherent team. He can reset them, give them a core philosophy. He can hopefully fix their map pool, which still isn't fully fixed. They've only got like half a map pool. But you saw with MIBR, they were a team without a map pool. In comes Yanko. All of a sudden, they've not only got a map pool, they've got a pretty solid map pool. They've got go-to maps. They understand where they can go. Their pick ban gets a lot better. Their preparation for other people's maps gets a lot better. I think Yanko can add a lot to this team and could be one of the best coaches this team has in terms of who's available in the world. Now, is that going to make them major champions? Is that going to make them the best team in the world? Well, with Astralis currently existing and in prime form, it would be unreasonable to expect so. But I do think depending on in-game leader issues, it can make them a better team, could make them second or third best team in the world, especially with Team Liquid changing their lineup. Why not, right? Could it be the best team? Yeah, probably not. There's too many disadvantages right now. Then again, a lot of that is due to the uncertainty and the fact we haven't seen the team play. I do think with the pieces they've got, they could be a lot better than they are. I think AdreN could be an amazing piece. I think Nico could even be a competent in-game leader if Yanko can help him. So even without them getting everything together, let's be real, they've got an amazing puncher's chance for the major. So many good pieces, so many experienced pieces that have been in playoffs and majors many, many times, and yet a team that's hungry to still win a major and will have kind of a chip on their shoulder that they haven't got the right lineup and that people like Astralis have been ahead of them and playing a style that they don't appreciate. I'm very interested to see this lineup. It's not their final move, I hope, but it's a great move on both accounts, Yanko and AdreN for my money. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.